Permitting, 404, 401, Coast Guard, number of permits are still required by any project. How you do that under design build is a state-by-state choice. And I listed 2 research projects here that TDOT may be interested in going back and looking at some of the case studies, how these agencies allocated the responsibility for obtaining permits to the design builder or kept that responsibility. So it's really a state-specific issue dealing with your state research agencies or the federal agency, the Coast Guard, the Corps, and knowing what works best in your state rather than delegating that risk, that responsibility to the design builder for obtaining these permits. There may be certain aspects of the permit preparation that the design builder is in the best position to provide the basic information, complete the groundwork, and then maybe TDOT wants to go forward to complete the permitting process with those agencies. But as I said, it depends on the state, depends on the issue, depends on the permit. Some agencies maintain the whole process. They're comfortable working with the resource agencies, and they want to provide a clear permit path such that the design build proposers won't have to consider that risk as they develop their proposals. It limits their risk and potentially shortens the overall length of time. Other agencies have considered a process where they want to permit a footprint for the project and then allow the design builder, require the design builder to require or obtain the final permit with those resource agencies. So they try to shift some of the risk of doing that to the design build teams. And it does provide more flexibility for the design builders, especially as they move forward with the design, perhaps minimizing the involvement of wetlands and other issues. And it's overall could be more efficient than the traditional process, but there is a risk of doing that and working with the resource agencies. In Tennessee, would your state resource agencies, not sure what they would be called, the ones that would have stormwater permit, the ones that would be functioning for EPA, are they comfortable working with the state, or could they be comfortable working with a design builder? Comments, opinions?
I think we did have one time the design builder issue all the permits, but TDOT has to review it and has to sign on the form. But the design builder will work on that.
So your state agency still holds TDOT responsible,
Yes,
wants
and
you to
review it.
submit the final form, review it, and be responsible for it.
But the design builder will work everything until we review it, and then I think Susanna can maybe add to that too.
Yeah, currently both TDEC and Corps of Engineers require TDOT to do permitting.
Okay. So that sort of clarifies this issue as going forward. Maybe the design builder will provide you with information that you need to apply for the permit. But it's probably a responsibility best owned by TDOT at this point. Okay, how about right-of-way acquisition? Here's one that's really varied from agency to agency. Some states want to maintain, control, keep. They're required by state law to, if they acquire any property, it has to be the state that's doing it. And they don't have the ability or want to, in some cases, delegate that responsibility to the design builders. So they insist on being involved in the design process, involved in the acquisition process, even as the design and construction develop, and they want to own that process of basically acquiring and managing the right-of-way. Other states have delegated that responsibility in part to the design builder of developing all the estimates, all the preliminary steps of the appraisal process, the acquisition process. The design builder can prepare, but ultimately to comply with state law and the Uniform Act requirements, the state is responsible for any final acquisition or right-of-way authorizations or actions by the state. So this particular risk sharing varies from state to state. And in the blue-green block down here, there's a NCHRP study that talks about the liability of design builders for right-of-way issues. I think it's an important study, perhaps for your right-of-way staff. Do we have anybody here with TDOT right-of-way or?
What, Yeah.
Anybody that would be involved with the Uniform Act?
I think with the design build, we did test all that. I mean, we did test if we do the right way, and Region 2 does that, and they just went and built whatever we told them to build. I mean, from the right way perspective. In Region 4, we let them do everything, the acquisition, I mean, coordination and appraisal too. Mike, you wanna add to that? Mike Walsh is here. Or Todd, do you wanna add to that? Like, what happened? We did have some lesson learned from that.
We had some problems with some of the right-of-way acquisition, took longer than expected. Very difficult. I don't think any of them wanted a condemnation,
Yes.
Did-
T-Dot.
but, I don't think any of them wanted
I feel like TDOT may be better suited to do the right-of-way acquisition, as much trouble as we had in Region 4. Time-wise, from our perspective, starting it in the committee, we wanted to shorten the time frame of the project and all that stuff. It just pushed the date out a lot further than we wanted to be pushed out.
We are in a claim with the design builder on that project that is related to time associated with right-of-way acquisition. I would say that in our experience, personally would prefer not to have it as part of the design builder's scope based on our experience.
Ultimately, you still have to comply with state law, state requirements, and Federal Highways Uniform Act requirements. Regardless of who does the acquisition or the steps they go through, the Uniform Act still applies. And even if the design builder or their consultant does the steps in the acquisition process, they still must comply with our requirements. So that's a consideration in sharing this risk or not with the industry in the RFP process. I mentioned the Uniform Act. There's our regulation for it. My carpool buddy, Arnold Feldman, is our headquarters person for the Uniform Act stuff. I did not realize that Federal Highways Uniform Act is the regulation that applies to all federal agencies that have federal assistance programs. So HUD, Federal Transit, they're all using federal highways regulation. And it's just an issue that I found interesting that we set the regulation for other federal agencies. Probably because of the extensive experience that state DOTs have had in the history of the Federal Aid Highway Program. So it's an important issue.